The sound of a heartbeat is supposed to be the most beautiful thing a mother can hear. But in this cold, sterile room in the heart of Seattle, that rhythmic thumping felt like a frantic drum solo in a house that was burning down. I lay there, trapped beneath layers of thin hospital blankets, 7.5 months pregnant and hooked up to 3 different monitors that tracked every erratic pulse of my body and the fragile life inside me. The doctors called it high risk. I called it a prison. My name is Elena Thorne. I am 29 years old, and until 5 minutes ago, I believed I was a partner in a 5-year marriage built on ironclad promises. The blue light of my smartphone screen cut through the dim gray light of the Pacific Northwest afternoon. A notification pinged. It was not a text. It was not a frantic call from a husband worried about his wife in the intensive care unit. It was an email. The subject line was 3 words that felt like a jagged blade pressed against my throat. Moving forward, separately. I remember the way the oxygen in the room seemed to vanish. I remember the sudden, sharp spike in the fetal monitor, as if my daughter could feel the tectonic plates of our world shifting. Marcus had always been a man of precision, a man of spreadsheets and schedules, but I never imagined he would use that precision to dissect my heart while I was fighting for our child's survival. I opened the message with trembling fingers, my vision blurring as the medical equipment hummed around me. He did not lead with an apology. He did not offer an explanation. He used bullet points. Marcus Thorne had effectively fired me from the position of his wife. He listed irreconcilable differences at the top of the list, followed by a sudden need for personal growth and a desire to seek a more compatible lifestyle. It read like a termination notice for an underperforming employee. My heart rate monitor began to wail, a high-pitched scream that echoed the one trapped in my chest. I looked at the timestamp on the email. He had sent it while he knew the doctors were performing tests on me. While I was terrified of early labor, Marcus was sitting somewhere in the comfort of our home, or perhaps a lawyer office, carefully formatting the end of our lives together. The betrayal was so sudden, so clinical, that for a moment, I could not even breathe. This was the man who had held my hand through morning sickness. This was the man who had helped me pick out a nursery theme just 3 weeks prior. Now he was moving forward, and he was leaving me anchored to a hospital bed. A sickening instinct took hold of me. It was the instinct of a woman who had spent her career looking for the hidden cracks in financial ledgers. My fingers moved of their own accord, swiping away the cold finality of the email and opening our joint banking app. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself he was just overwhelmed by the stress of the pregnancy. But as the login screen flickered to life, the truth hit me harder than any physical contraction ever could. Yesterday, our savings account held $47,000. It was our safety net, the money we had meticulously saved for the house, for the hospital bills, and for our daughter's future. Now, the screen showed a balance of $12. $12. He had drained every cent we had built together over 5 years of overtime and missed vacations. He had left exactly enough to keep the account from automatically closing, a final, mocking gesture of his efficiency. Every dollar of my hard-earned income, every penny of our shared dreams, had been siphoned away in the dark. I sat there in the silence of the Seattle Medical Center, the rain streaking against the window like tears I was too shocked to cry. The betrayal was a heavy, suffocating blanket. He had not just left me. He had sabotaged me. He had waited until I was at my most vulnerable, until I was physically unable to chase him or confront him, sought to strip me of my dignity and my security. He had calculated my weakness. He had gambled on the fact that a woman in a high-risk pregnancy wing would be too broken to fight back. The sound of the fetal monitor continued its steady, frantic pace. Thump, thump, thump. It was the sound of a life that did not know its father had already abandoned it. It was the sound of a mother who had just realized her entire marriage was a house of cards that had been set on fire. I looked at the $12 on the screen and then back at the cold, bulleted email. My name is Elena Thorne. I am a forensic accountant. Marcus thinks he has left me with nothing, but he has forgotten one vital detail. I am the one who finds what people try to hide. He has started a war in the middle of my tragedy, and he has no idea that he just handed a master of evidence a reason to destroy him. The broken trust was a wound that would never fully heal, but as a new, cold clarity washed over me, I realized that I was no longer just a patient. I was a predator in wait. The divorce was only the beginning. The real audit was about to start. The monitor beeped in a rhythm that felt like mocking laughter, a constant reminder that my life was being measured in mechanical pulses. My phone buzzed again, but this time it was not a legal notice or another cold email from my husband. It was a message from Isabella, my sister. We had not spoken in 2 years, our relationship fractured by a petty argument over our mother estate that seemed like a lifetime ago. Her text was a cold splash of reality in my sterile prison. She had sent a screenshot from Instagram, and the image scorched my retinas. There was Marcus. My Marcus. His arms were wrapped tightly around a woman named Amber, a 22-year-old fitness influencer whose youth was as loud as the neon gym clothes she wore. They were standing in front of my fireplace, the very one where we had hung our Christmas stockings just months ago. My wedding photos were still visible on the mantle behind them, ghost-like witnesses to his absolute lack of shame. The caption read, "New chapters with my queen." I felt a heat bloom in my chest that had nothing to do with my fever. This was the cheating husband I had shared a bed with while he dreamed of another life. This was the affair he had been cultivating while I carried his child and worried about our future. I scrolled through the public profile of this girl with shaking hands, my heart rate accelerating until the hospital equipment began to wail in protest. The timeline was a trail of breadcrumbs leading to my own destruction. There were photos of them in Denver from 2 months ago, the very weekend Marcus had claimed he was at a high-stakes corporate conference. While I was home, 5 months pregnant and struggling with morning sickness, he was posing for selfies in hotel bars. I pulled my laptop onto the thin hospital tray, the screen reflecting the exhaustion and the cold, new fire in my eyes. I accessed the public records portal with a speed born of professional habit. Marcus had filed the separation papers 60 days ago. 2 months. He had lied about our status while I was still 5.5 months pregnant, living under the same roof. My breath hitched as I realized the deeper, more sinister implication of his timing. By backdating the separation to a time before my emergency admission, he had effectively removed me from his medical insurance policy while I was lying in a high-risk unit with life-threatening complications. This was not just a betrayal of the heart. This was insurance fraud. This was a calculated criminal attempt to leave me and our daughter to drown in hundreds of thousands of dollars in medical debt while he played house with a woman barely old enough to drink. Marcus has always underestimated me. To him, I was just a quiet woman who spent too much time looking at ledgers, a pushover accountant who would roll over and accept whatever scraps he tossed from his table. He saw me as a soft target, weakened by pregnancy and confined to a bed. He forgot that my job is to find the ghosts in the machine. I am a high-stakes forensic accountant. I spend my professional life unearthing the millions that men like him try to bury in offshore accounts, shell companies, and falsified tax returns. I do not just count money. I hunt it. I find the blood in the black ink. I looked at the email he had sent me, the one with the cold bullet points and the arrogant assumption that he could simply delete me from his life. I did not cry. I did not beg for an explanation. I did not call him to scream into the void of his indifference. Instead, I typed a single icy word and hit send. Understood. That was it. No emotion, no drama, just a cold confirmation that the message had been received. I closed the email and opened a fresh blank spreadsheet. I titled it the Thorn Liquidation Project. As the fetal monitor continued its steady beat, I began to cross-reference every receipt, every credit card statement, and every fraudulent claim he had ever made. He thought he was moving forward separately, but he had no idea he was walking straight into a meticulously planned financial execution. My marriage was dead, but my career was about to become his worst nightmare. This was no longer just a relationship ending. This was a hunt. I was going to find every penny he stole, every lie he told, and I was going to use them to bury him. He thought I was vulnerable. He was about to learn that a woman with nothing left to lose and a spreadsheet is the most dangerous auditor in the world. The antiseptic air of room 412 usually whispered of recovery, but tonight, it felt like the heavy, electric stillness before a lightning strike. My hospital bed, once a place of forced stagnation, had been transformed into a gleaming digital fortress. I was surrounded by a tangle of charging cables and 3 humming laptops that cast a flickering sapphire glow across the sterile white walls. Where there should have been bouquets of lilies and celebratory balloons, there were stacks of subpoena drafts and bank statements. Every tube connected to my arm felt like a conduit for justice, and every beep of the fetal monitor was a ticking clock counting down to the moment Marcus' world would catch fire. I was a woman confined by medical necessity, but in the digital realm, I was an apex predator. The heavy door pushed open, and Cassandra stepped in, her designer heels striking the linoleum with the sharp, rhythmic precision of a war drum. She was more than my closest friend. She was a legal shark who scented blood in the water. She dropped a heavy leather briefcase onto my bed with a thud that echoed like a closing cell door. "We are not just seeking a settlement, Elena," she said, her eyes narrowed with a lethal intensity. "We are seeking a total eclipse of his existence." Before I could respond, a second figure emerged from the shadows of the hallway. It was Evelyn, my mother-in-law. Her face was a map of sorrow, but her gaze was forged in cold iron. She did not come to offer excuses for her son. She came to offer his head on a platter. "History is a cruel teacher," Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling but certain as she pulled a chair close to my bedside. 30 years ago, Marcus' father performed this exact same dance of cruelty. He waited until I was fragile, emptied our lives, and vanished. I watched Marcus grow into that same shadow, and I will not let the cycle claim you or my granddaughter. She reached into her coat and produced a small, silver thumb drive and a slip of paper with 10 digits scrawled in ink. "These are the master codes to the family safe and his offshore cloud backups. He thinks he is a genius, but he is merely a thief following an old script. The broken trust that had nearly suffocated me hours ago suddenly evaporated, replaced by a cold, analytical fury." I took the drive, and as a forensic accountant, I began the grim work of dissecting Marcus Thorne. We played what Cassandra called fraud bingo, and the results were staggering. My fingers flew across the keys, unearthing a secret credit union account in Jersey that had been siphoned dry of $47,000. I found thousands more in company expenses used to fund Amber's influencer career, from designer wardrobe hauls to high-end camera equipment, all masked as client entertainment. But the most chilling discovery was a hidden folder of forged psychiatric evaluations. Marcus had been meticulously crafting a narrative of my mental instability, a cold-blooded plan to prove I was an unfit mother before our daughter even took her first breath. The betrayal was absolute, but so was my resolve. I spent the next 4 hours building the ultimate weapon, a color-coded, cross-referenced spreadsheet that turned his lies into a roadmap for his incarceration. It was a masterpiece of financial ruin. At 3 a.m, I dialed Victor, the CEO of Marcus' firm. "Victor, it is Elena," I said, my voice as sharp and cold as a winter morning. "I am sending you a file labeled Compliance Emergency. You need to see how your money has been spent on a 22-year-old girl influencer dreams before your board meeting tomorrow." I hit send, and for a moment, the only sound in the room was the hum of the cooling fans and the steady, rhythmic beat of my daughter's heart. Victor's voice was low and dangerous when he finally spoke. "This is a bloodbath, Elena. Thank you for bringing this to me." I hung up and leaned back, the blue light of the screens finally fading. This Reddit relationship story would not end with a tragic heroine. It would end with a woman who took the shards of her shattered life and ground them into glass to pave the way for her child's future. The cheating husband thought he could leave me with $12 and a broken heart, but he had ignored the fact that I was the one who knew exactly where all the bodies were buried. The turning point had been reached. I was no longer fighting for survival. I was fighting for the throne. The first sharp claw of a contraction struck me at 4 a.m, a white-hot lightning bolt that signaled Lyra was ready to face the world 6 weeks before her time. The pain was a physical manifestation of the storm I had been weathering. But as the nurses rushed me toward the delivery room, I felt an eerie, ironclad calm. I was not the same woman who had collapsed in tears over a cold email days ago. While the monitors beeped a frantic rhythm and the doctors worked with urgent precision, I gripped the bed rails and thought of the audit. I gave birth to my daughter in a surge of sweat and silver light, a tiny 4-pound warrior who screamed with a ferocity that matched my own. When they placed her on my chest, her skin warm and her eyes searching for mine, the last remnants of my husband influence evaporated. As I held a pen with a trembling hand to sign her birth certificate, I was not just claiming her. I was triggering the ultimate trap. My grandmother had established a $500,000 family trust that remained dormant until the birth of my first child. A secret legacy Marcus had ignored because he never bothered to read the fine print of my life. He thought he had left me with $12, but with one stroke of ink, I had unlocked a fortune that was legally, entirely, and eternally out of his reach. While I was breathing in the sweet, milky scent of my daughter in the quiet of the neonatal ward, Marcus was beginning his final morning of freedom. He walked into the glass and steel lobby of his office in downtown Seattle at 8:45 in the morning, radiating the slick, unearned confidence of a man who thought he had successfully erased a nuisance. He reached for the card reader with his beast mode, gym-honed pride, but the sensor did not turn green. It turned a cold, blinking red. Denied. The silence in that lobby must have been deafening as two security guards, men he had shared elevator jokes with for years, stepped forward with stone faces. They did not greet him. They escorted him like a common trespasser toward the human resources wing. The room was a gauntlet of his own making. Victor, his boss, sat at the head of the table with the color-coded spreadsheet of Marcus embezzlement laid out like a map of a crime scene. Beside him sat a process server and a man in a dark, tailored suit whose federal badge shimmered under the fluorescent lights. The ambush was total. Marcus was served with the divorce papers first, a heavy stack of legal finality that signaled the end of our marriage and the beginning of his reckoning. Then came the company charges for $80,000 in stolen funds. But the true federal twist arrived when the man in the dark suit spoke. Because Marcus had been arrogant enough to use the United States Postal Service to mail forged psychiatric documents and falsified insurance papers across state lines to the Jersey Credit Union, his small-scale betrayal had graduated into federal wire and mail fraud. His midlife crisis had officially become a criminal record. The end of the beast mode era did not happen with a roar, but with a pathetic, wet thud. As the federal agents led him toward the parking lot in handcuffs, Marcus tried to run, a desperate attempt to maintain the illusion of control. But the Pacific Northwest rain offered him no mercy. He stepped into a deep, oily puddle. His expensive dress shoes lost their grip, and he sprawled face first into the mud. He lay there in the gray water, his wrists bound in steel, while the papers documenting his husband's infidelity and financial crimes fluttered around him like dying birds. The man who had abandoned his pregnant wife in an intensive care unit was now sobbing in a parking lot, a broken shadow of the person he pretended to be. I watched the video footage later with Lyra in my arms, feeling no pity, only the deep, resonant satisfaction of a woman who had finally balanced the books. He had tried to steal my breath, but I had given birth to the very thing that buried him. The air in the courtroom felt heavy with the scent of old wood and the cold finality of the law. Marcus sat across from me, no longer the arrogant man who had sent that cold, bulleted email, but a shriveled version of himself wearing a suit that was 2 sizes too small. He looked at me, perhaps hoping for a flicker of the woman who used to apologize for being too loud, but he found only a statue carved from ice. The judge did not mince words. She called his actions a masterclass in depravity and a calculated strike against a vulnerable life. The sentence was delivered with a sharp rap of the gavel that echoed like a gunshot. 6 years in federal prison. He was ordered to forfeit the house, his entire 401k was liquidated for restitution, and in the most silent, heavy moment of the morning, his parental rights were terminated. He had effectively erased himself from our lives. leaving behind nothing but the wreckage of his own ambition. A few weeks later, an unexpected envelope arrived from Ohio. It was from Amber. There were no filtered photos or fitness tags, just a letter written on plain notebook paper that smelled of cheap perfume and regret. She confessed that Marcus had told her I was a mentally unstable ghost who had abandoned him years ago. He had used her credit cards to buy her the very gifts he claimed were symbols of his wealth, leading her into a financial hole she was now struggling to climb out of. She was 22 and foolish. But she was not a monster. She enclosed a check for $5,000, every penny she had saved from her retail jobs, and an apology that felt genuine in its desperation. I did not forgive her, but I understood her. She called him a splendifather, someone who promised a sweetness that was entirely synthetic and left a bitter, toxic aftertaste once the illusion faded. I took that money and placed it directly into a college fund for Lyra, a seed of a future grown from the ashes of his lies. 8 months have passed since that day in the hospital, and the world looks entirely different from the view in my new home office. The Seattle rain still drums against the glass, but now it sounds like a rhythm of success rather than a funeral dirge. My forensic accounting firm has grown beyond my wildest dreams. I am no longer just a woman who counts numbers. I am the woman who hunts the predators who hide behind them. My phone rang last Tuesday, and it was a director from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. They wanted my eyes on a high-level marriage fraud case. They wanted the woman who had turned a medical emergency into a surgical financial execution. I accepted the contract before he could finish the sentence. My trauma had become my greatest professional asset, and my name had become a warning to men like Marcus. Tonight, the house is quiet, save for the soft, rhythmic breathing of Lyra in the nursery. I stood in the doorway for a long time, watching her sleep, a perfect being who will never know the sound of her father's voice or the sting of his betrayal. This Reddit relationship story began with a broken trust that felt like a death sentence. But as I looked at the daughter I fought to save, I realized Marcus had made a fatal mistake. He thought he was destroying a victim at her weakest moment, but he was actually tempering a weapon. He tried to leave me with $12 and a shattered heart, but he only succeeded in making me the most dangerous woman in his world. My marriage ended in a cold, digital graveyard, but I rose from it with a sword in my hand. I am Elena Thorne, and I have finally balanced the books. He thought I would break, but instead, I became the storm that cleared the path for my daughter's future.